The other day, I was scrolling through social media, looking at some of the groups that I belong to. So I belong to various writers groups and writers and readers. And somebody asked, and it's not the first time that I've seen this question as, do I really have to read books to be a writer? Do I have to like reading books to be a writer? Or framed differently, but basically the same question. And I'm sure I commented, or maybe I didn't comment because, again, I've seen it so many times. But I went back and I thought, I'm going to write a blog about this because it kind of bothers me that somebody would ask that question, because what it's telling me is that they don't really understand the point of reading, the reason that we do want to read as writers. So I'm going to talk to you about that today. I want to explain to you why it's so valuable and why every writer should be reading as much as possible. So join me today, even though it sounds like it's not that exciting of a topic. I have some really good reasons on why I think you should read.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Monte channel. If you are just joining me, thank you and welcome. I'm Julia Monte. I'm a women's fiction author, and I do like to make videos to share with you on Fridays some writing tips, or some of the things that I am thinking about that can maybe help you to become a better writer. So let's talk about reading. Why is it that you should be a reader, that you should read as many books in as many genres as possible? Well, reading does three things that is super important to us as writers. The first is that it helps us to recognize rhythms of storytelling. The second is that it sharpens our ability to recognize what makes writing effective. And third, it deepens our understanding of human emotion and perspective. So becoming a better reader or a reader is not just helpful or interesting, it's essential to us as writers. So let's talk first about training those creative instincts that we hopefully have as writers. So when my children were young, they took piano lessons, and they learned a certain method. It was a Suzuki method. If you're not familiar with music or with the Suzuki method, so the first thing they do is not learn the different notes and how to play them on the piano. They actually learn to play the piece before they ever learn to read the music, which sounds like everything's backwards and it's reversed, right? But it works really, really well, because what they're doing is they listen to the music, they learn how to play the keys in the music, and they listen to the music over and over and over again. So they have it recorded even while they sleep. I play the music, they hear it, they hear it, they hear it, they practice it so that they get the muscle memory into their fingers as they play. And by the time they start to do that, by the time they actually start to play, they've heard that music so many times that they know they've trained their ear to hear the sounds and the tone and how it's supposed to sound. So when they actually learn like where the keys are and how to play it, they play it almost perfectly. And then later when they're looking at the notes and they're learning, it's like, oh, well, this is the C and this is the this and this is what I'm playing. They understand it because they've heard it so many times and they've played it so many times. So just like musicians can train their ear to hear music and to understand and be able to play music, as writers, we're doing the same thing when we are reading stories. We are internalizing a rhythm of a type of storytelling, of a type of genre. We are internalizing the tone and the voice and the style, and we're learning what works and what doesn't work. So even though you might think of reading as just being a passive, activity, we're just reading and it's just, we're not really doing anything. You really are, because you're training your brain, your ear, to hear things, to absorb patterns, dialogue, to know what dialogue sounds natural and what doesn't, to know how to build tension. How does an author do that if that's the type of writing that you're writing? How to build suspense, how author or character motivation is being created, because we can, as we read it, if we read tons of these same types of stories, we'll start to see these patterns, we'll start to feel it, so that when we are writing it, it starts to come natural. It's like now I feel like I've gotten to a point where the tension should be at this level. And then I know that by the time I get to this point in the novel, the tension should be at a different level. It should go down, then it should go back up, right? So we start to feel that because we've read so many of the novels of that genre. So subconsciously, what we're doing is we're learning about story structure, we're learning about character development, and we're starting to see what the sentence rhythm and style should be like for each genre. So think of a young child when they first learn a language. What are they doing? They're not learning grammar. They're not learning how to put something together. What they're doing is they're hearing things over and over and over again. And then when they start to speak, it really becomes out and it comes natural to them. And the same with you. The more you read your genre, but then other genres as well, it starts to become part of you. You start to understand it subconsciously so that when you write your novel, then again, it just comes out better. It flows better, and you're going to have less problems actually writing your novel. The second thing that you're doing by reading a lot of novels is expanding your narrative possibilities. So what do I mean by that? So each genre has its own structure, its own storytelling structure. It has its own character arcs, its own types of worlds, right? And so the more types of stories you are reading, the more you're cataloging in your mind. So in your mind, you're saying, okay, this is what this type of story is like. This is what a Western is like. This is what a romance is like. This is what a suspense novel is like. And all of these get stored as possibilities of the way to write stories. So as a kid, for example, I remember reading a book that I really loved, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I learned that as a writer, you can write anything. Almost anything is possible. All kinds of crazy things happen in the story, right? So the possibilities, I don't have to write about a world that is just like mine. I can actually let my imagination flow and I could write whatever I want. A few years later, as I got older, one of my teachers said, okay, we're going to read The Call of the Wild. And I realized that, okay, this is a different type of book. It's more realistic. There's some very raw, deep emotional relationship, especially between the dog and the sled, the owner, right? So I learned that some stories could be very realistic and deeply emotional. Then fast forward again until I got to, I don't know what, somewhere in junior high school, middle school, when I read Jane Eyre. And then I thought, oh, okay, so this is a romance, but it's not just a romance, it's Gothic romance. And I learned that stories about relationships can be really interesting and how important it is to bring in the background of the character and how that influences the current relationships. So each type of story that I read, I learned something new and I was able to catalog that in my mind, right? So I'm not doing it consciously, but subconsciously it's going into my brain and I'm learning all these different types of storytelling and genres. By the time I'm 21 years old and I am in college and I'm deciding I want to write my own novel, I have so many different experiences and types of stories that I can pull from, that I can say, oh, okay, yeah, I want to write a romance, and these are examples of things that I've read in the past, and this is what I can do. I knew what I liked. I knew what I didn't like. I knew what worked well. I knew what didn't work well. So I read Jane Eyre. That was a great novel, but I read other romances that weren't very great. And so I thought, okay, well, there's some things that this author did that was not good. I don't want to do that, but I do want to do what this author did. I do want to describe my characters this way. I do want to add details this way so that I understood how to write a good novel based on what I had read. And it's good to have exposure to a variety of storytelling possibilities because let's face it, we can only write what we know, right? So we're only going to be exposed to so many things on our own. If we just write from our own experience in our own life, which we should, but if that's all we have, we're creating sort of this echo chamber of the same stories over and over again in our head. But if we have other examples, other things that we can do, then we're going to be able to create a better story when we're writing our novel. And looking at it from a different perspective, we also know what's out there, right? So we're not going to be reinventing the wheel. We're not going to write a story that's already been told, at least not in the same way. There are no new stories, but we're going to say, it's like, okay, well, I already know that there's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory out there. I'm not, if I want to write a children's book of that type, I'm not going to write that story. because I've already read it, right? Not that I would magically decide to write one like that without ever knowing, but you know what I mean, right? That you're familiar with what's out there, so you're not going to be recreating something that's already been done. Another thing that reading does is that it sharpens our critical eye. So you can't help it as a writer to criticize. So you're going to be critical of what you're reading. You're going to be evaluating whether something works, whether it doesn't work, whether you like characters, whether you didn't, where did it keep your interest, did it not, was it suspenseful, was it not? Okay, so you're always evaluating what you're reading, and becomes helpful not only for novels that you read, but then you transfer that to your own writing. When you are editing your own story or writing your own story, you are a little bit more critical of your own work too. So you start to understand if something, if a scene is flawed. You start to notice if the pacing is off. You start to notice if your dialogue feels unnatural. So all the things that we want as writers to notice, we start to notice it more in our own work because we've read so many other great novels, hopefully, where people did it the right way. So we know when we're writing our own what's lacking and what we need to add, what we need to change. Okay, and we can do this purposely, right? So keeping in mind that most novels have gone through multiple rounds of editing between them and their editors, their agents. Okay, so you're not going to encounter terrible, terrible writing. And most of the writing that's out there, most of the published novels are good. So that works because it gives us some really great examples to look through. So you want to purposely critique stories that you read. And one of the things that you can do is to read multiple books in your genre and then compare one author to another. So how does author A create an interesting love scene compared to author B compared to author C, right? So you're comparing how different people do it because you're learning different ways of doing it from these 3, 4, 100 authors. And you might look at things like, let's say you're a thriller writer. Well, there's, psychological thrillers and thrillers that are high action and really, get your blood pumping. And so which one do you like better? Which one do you enjoy reading better? If you were going to write a thriller, do you like the psychological thrillers better, like the Dean Koontz type books? Or are you more action? You like the action and the chase and all of that, right? So as you compare different authors, you start to realize what you like best, what you would like to write, and what techniques these authors use to effectively tell their story. You also want to analyze what keeps you engaged and what doesn't. So at what point do you lose interest in a story? At what point do you close the book and go to sleep at night? And at what point do you do the opposite? Like, oh my God, I'm really, really exhausted, but I have to read one more chapter. What did the author do to keep you engaged? Also notice things like exposition. How did the writer write the narrative, or the slower parts, or what some people call the more boring parts of the book? How did they do it though to keep you interested? Some writers will just dump a lot of information on you, and some of them will feed it to you a little bit at a time. Which one works better? Which one do you like better? Does one way work better for certain types of books and differently for other books, or for different scenes? Like in some scenes you might want to dump a bunch of information so you can move on to the next action, or is it better just again to feed it to you a little bit at a time? How does the author do it? What do you like best? Look at things like character building. How does the author build a character? How do they build in the backstory? How do they tell you about the flaws that the character has? One of the things you might want to do, that I did when I first started writing, is to create a notebook. And in that notebook I had different I looked at just actually little things. Like I looked at characterization, I looked at description, I looked at tension, I looked at all these things, and I had all these dividers in there. And as I read a book, I would say, oh, I really like the way that this character did description. So I would go to the description tab and I would actually copy a little part that I liked, and I would write why I liked it. Basically, I was teaching myself how to write, right? So by the time I was finished, I had this giant notebook with all these examples of different books. And it's like, oh, how do I build tension? How do I describe a kissing scene for a romance? How do I, describe all these different things? And I had my notebook that I taught myself how to write this in this genre. So being able to analyze and actually critique other stories is a huge reason why you want to read and you want to look at different examples. Lastly, it helps to build your emotional range. So what does that mean? I mean, we're human, so we've all felt emotions. We don't have to read a novel to know what an emotion feels like. However, writing is different. We're not just trying to feel emotions. We're trying to learn how to express emotions so that the reader will understand and feel the emotion. It's different to be able to express that emotion in writing than it is just to say, okay, I know what anger feels like. Okay, but how do you write this so that the reader will feel it as well? What you don't want is for it to be just an intellectual, right? So you don't want to say, well, yes, this character was angry, because that's not explaining, that's not helping the reader to feel that. It's telling them intellectually, but it's not helping them to feel it. But by reading a lot of different novels and seeing how other authors express emotion, and what touched you, you start to learn how to do that too. And it's going to be different, right? So you might look at things from different cultures or different perspectives. Not everybody is going to express a certain emotion the same way. Somebody may scream and yell to show anger, but somebody else may do it differently. Somebody else may be totally silent when they're angry, right? Depending on who this character is. There's a book when I first started writing, and I did find it hard to express emotions. And even though I'd read a lot of books, I still had a difficult time. Okay, how am I going to, express that, somebody's showing empathy or somebody is showing whatever. And I bought this book. It's called Creating Character Emotions by Anne Hood. And it was really good. So she goes through all different types of emotion: happiness, grief, what else? Just tons of them, excitement. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? And how do you describe it in order to have the reader feel it too? And one of the things that she does say there is that people express things differently. So as long as you're showing it, right? So for example, in my family, my father, when he was angry, he was very physical. Like he would throw like furniture across the room, right? And that was his expression of anger. Not very healthy, but that was his expression of anger, right? But other people, again, may be very quiet. They may cry out of frustration because they're angry. So you want it to fit your character, but you want to show that and you want to be able to express that. And by reading a wide variety of people being angry, people being happy, people being excited, you're going to learn that there are all these different perspectives or all these different ways of doing it. Otherwise, you might just go with what you grew up with. Like I might have every single one of my characters, when they get angry, throw furniture around because that's what I witnessed. But by reading other things, I realized like, oh wait, no, there are different ways that people express different emotions, right? So the more I read, the more I understand that there are different perspectives, different ways of expressing emotion. So to go back to the question of whether you should read if you want to be a writer, or do I have to read if I want to be a writer? Well, technically, of course not. You don't have to, but you're just making things harder on yourself because you're missing out on learning from what other people have written, on learning different perspectives, learning about different emotions, about learning about the various types of stories that are out there, different genres, and then bringing it to your own writing, internalizing all of that, and then having it actually come out naturally so that when you do start to write, it's so much easier because you've already seen and experienced so many different types of story that, as like my kids with their Suzuki music, by the time you sit down on the keyboard and start creating your story, it's going to be almost an intuitive process because you have internalized various different types of stories. So if you're serious about becoming a writer, I suggest that you read as much as you can in as widely as possible. I hope that I've convinced you. I hope that from now on you will have the same reaction that I did that I do when I hear those questions. Like, of course you have to read. And I hope that you read as much as you can. So thank you for listening and watching my video. If you have enjoyed this video, found it helpful, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel and share these videos with your friends. And I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.